Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Following the death of Major General Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain on February 14th, 1914, his home state of Maine and many others across the country mourned a man who, half a century earlier, had stood his ground with his men of the 20th Maine Infantry along Little Round Top at Gettysburg. Chamberlain's telling and retelling of the story during the decades that followed did much to establish this part of the battlefield and what happened there during the late afternoon of July 2nd, 1863, as one of the most consequential moments in the history of the country. Newspapers carrying word of Chamberlain's death reprinted parts of his speech he gave at Gettysburg on October 3rd, 1889, where and when a large crowd of veterans and citizens gathered for formal ceremonies dedicating the monuments erected by the state of Maine to her sons who fought for the Union. I want to read the speech in its entirety, which reveals Chamberlain's gifts as a writer, a fighter, and a supporter of the Constitution. The state of Maine stands here today, Chamberlain began, for the first time in her own name. In other days, she was here indeed, here in power, here in majesty, here in glory, but as elsewhere, and often in the centuries before, with that humility which perhaps the necessary law of human exaltation, her worth merged in a name mightier than her own, so here content to be part of that greater being that she held dearer than self, but which was made more worthy of honor by her belonging to it, the United States of America. For which great end, in every heroic struggle from the beginning of our history until now, a space of more than 200 years, she has given her best of heart and brain and poured out her most precious blood. Today, she stands here in a service of mingled recognitions, humbly submitting to that mysterious law of sacrifice and suffering for the deliverance from evil, bending sorrowfully above the dust to which have returned again the priceless jewels offered from her bosom, proud that it was her part and lot that what was best in her giving and what was immortal in her loss should be builded into the nation's wheel, and stretching out her hand of justice and of grace to raise along these silent lines of battle monuments of eloquence of her costly devotion and of the great reward. She stands here not ashamed when the roll of honor is called to speak her own name and answer, "Here." The organization of the Army of the Union was a counterpart of that of the Union itself. In its ultimate elements and separate units of organization, the personal force and political authority of each state were present, but they were merged and mingled in another order, which took another and higher name, which exercised jointly in a single aim for the common weal. For reasons various but valid, the regiments and batteries of the several states were, for the most part, separated in assignment, distributed to different brigades, divisions, corps, armies. Some sad suggestions there were among these reasons. For one, the care that in some great disaster, the loss might not fall too heavily on the families of one neighborhood. But there was a greater reason. Our thoughts were not then of states as states, but of the states united, of that union of oneness in which the people of the United States lived and moved and had their being. Our hearts beat to that one high thought. Our eyes saw but the old flag, and our souls saw it glorious with the symbols of power and peace and blessing in the forward march of man. But now that this victory is won, the cause vindicated, and the great fact of the being and authority of the people of the United States has been solemnly attested, the moral forces summoning and, as it were, consecrating the physical as token and instrument of their convictions. Now, the several states that stood as one in that high cause come here in their own name, in the noblest sphere of their states' rights, to ratify and confirm this action of their delegates, to set these monuments as seals to their own great deeds and New Testament of life. Today, we stand on that awful arena where character, which was the growth of centuries, was tested and determined by the issue of a single day. We're compassed about by a cloud of witnesses, not alone the shadowy ranks of those who wrestled here, but the greater parties of the action, they for whom these things were done. Forms of thought rise before us as in an amphitheater, circle beyond circle, rank above rank, the state, the union of the people. And these are one. Let us from the arena contemplate them, the spiritual spectators. There is an aspect in which the question at issue might seem to be of forms and not of substance. It was, on its face, a question of government. There was a boastful pretense that each state held in its hands the death warrant of the nation, that any state had a right, without show of justification outside of its own caprice, to violate the covenants of the Constitution, to break away from the Union and set up its own little sovereignty as sufficient for all human purposes and ends, thus leaving it to the mere will or whim of any member of our political system to destroy the body and dissolve the soul of the great people. This was the political question submitted to the arbitrament of arms. But the victory was of great politics over small. It was the right reason, the moral consciousness and solemn resolve of the people, rectifying its wavering exterior lines according to the lifelines of its organic being. There is a phrase abroad which obscures the legal and the moral questions involved in the issue, indeed, which distorts and falsifies history. The war between the states. There are here no states outside of the Union. Resolving themselves out of it does not release them. Even were they successful in entrenching themselves in this attitude, they would only relapse into territories of the United States. Indeed, several of the states so resolving were never in their own right either states or colonies, but their territories were purchased by the common treasury of the Union and were admitted as states out of its grace and generosity. Underneath this phrase and title, "The War Between the States," lies the false assumption that our Union is but a compact of states. Were it so, neither party to it could renounce it as his own mere will or caprice. Even on this theory, the states remaining true to the terms of their treaty and loyal to its intent would have the right to resist force by force, to take up the gauge of battle thrown down by the rebellious states and compel them to return to their duty and their allegiance. The law of nations would have accorded the loyal states this right and remedy. But this was not our theory, nor our justification. The flag we bore into the field was not that of a particular states, no matter how many, nor how loyal, arrayed against other states. It was the flag of the Union, the flag of the people, vindicating the right and charged with the duty of preventing any factions, no matter how many, nor under what pretense, from breaking up this common country. It was the country of the South, as well as the country of the North. The men who sought to dismember it belonged to it. Its life was a larger life, aloof from the dominance of self-surroundings, but in it their truest interests were interwoven. They suffered themselves to be drawn down from the spiritual ideal by influences of the physical world. There is a man, that peril of the double nature. But I see another law, says St. Paul. I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind. There is here, I admit, an intrinsic confusion, one arising out of the very nature of the case, for both sides claimed to be fighting for the same things: self-government, freedom, if that means liberty to act at one's own will, and even constitutional rights. But the simple fact is, and a most momentous one, that the same human life runs in many spheres, and here people were feeling and thinking and seeing and acting in one sphere and capacity on one side and in another on the other side, temperament, education, habit have placed sometimes in mighty consequences. Here, one party limited their interests by the bounds of the states, the other by the bounds of the country, comprehending the rights of man. The truth is, our political life and being are in two capacities: people of the states and the people of the United States. Every man and woman of us lives in both at once. In the ruling sentiments of a complex people, the likenesses may be very great, yet some small differences become the starting points for great issues of right and wrong, pivots on which mighty movements swung. No, not a war between the states, but a war between the spheres. No one of us would disregard the manly qualities and earnest motives among those who permitted themselves to strike at the life of the Union we held so vital and so dear, and thus made themselves our foes. Truly has it been said that the best of virtues may be enlisted in the worst of causes. Had the question of breaking up this union been submitted to the people of the South as American citizens, I do not believe it possible that such a resolution could have been taken. But the leaders in that false step knew how to take advantage of instincts deeply planted in every American heart, and by perverting their state governments and making their conspiracy seem to be an act and intent of the states, sprung an appeal to the sentiment of loyalty to the great principle of local self-government, and the thrilling reveille of cannon swept the heartstrings of a chivalrous and impressionable people. There are times when it is more natural to act than to reason, and easier to fight than be right. But the men that followed that signal made a terrible mistake, misled by fictions, mistaught as to fact and doctrine by their masters of political history and public law, falsely fired by misdirected sentiment, mazed in the strange contradiction that they were at once the champions of democracy and the exponents of aristocratic superiority. They heeded not the calm, true life rolling on deep within, the mightier solution of differences, the great coherence of affinity, stronger by counterpoise of attractions and interfusion of unlikenesses than any mere aggregation of sameness of elements. They did not recognize the providential facts of history beyond the willfulness of man, that interior constitution, formative and directive of all others, that deeper organic law, that divinely pressing ideal by which a nation grows. There was no war between the states. It was a war in the name of certain states to destroy the political existence of the United States, in membership of which alone, on any just theory of the government, their own sovereignty as states inhered and could make itself effectual. To this absurd pass did the false theory come, a war of states against the people, and, if successful, the suicide of the states. Our enemies, it is true, by their choice of field, secured the opportunity to say that they were resisting an invader, that they were fighting for their native soil and birthright, for their homes and all that men hold dear in them. We understand the power of sentiments like these, even when abused and played upon by indirection. The state is dear to all of us. It is the guardian of what we may call home rights, the almoner of home-born charities, the circle within which likenesses of material, identity of interest, and sympathy of sentiment make a crystal unity. Were our own state attacked in its high place and rightful function, we should defend it as valiantly as our brethren of the South were made to think they were defending theirs. But no such assault was made. We fought against no state, but for its deliverance. We fought the enemies of our common country to overthrow the engines and symbols of its destruction wherever found upon its soil. We fought no better, perhaps, than they. We exhibited, perhaps, no higher individual qualities, but the cause for which we fought was higher. Our thought was wider. We, too, were fighting for birthright and native soil, for homes and all the sanctities of life. wide over the land, and far forward through the years to come. For all this belongs to us, and we to it. That thought was our power. We took rank by its height and not of our individual selves. It is something great and greatening to cherish an ideal, to act in the light of the truth that is far away and far above, to set aside the near advantage, the momentary pleasure, the snatching of seeming good to self, and to act for remoter ends, for higher good, and for interest other than our own. To us, this people in its life on earth was a moral personality, having a character and a commission, hence responsibility, hence duty, hence right, and its authority. The union was a body of spiritual unity. Of this we were part, responsible to it and for it, and our sacrifice was its service. Our personality exists in two identities, the sphere of self and the sphere of soul. One is circumscribed, the other moving out on boundless trajectories. One is near and therefore dear, and the other far and high and therefore great. We live in both, but most in the greatest. Men reach their completest development not in isolation nor working within narrow bounds, but through membership and participation in life of largest scope and fullness. To work out all the worth of manhood, to gain free range and play for all specific differences, to find a theater and occasion for exercise of the highest virtues, we need the widest organization of the human forces consistent with the laws of cohesion and self-direction. It is only by these radiating and reflecting influences that the perfection of the individual and of the race can be achieved. A great and free country is not merely defense and protection. For every earnest spirit, it is opportunity and inspiration. In its rich content and manifold resources, its bracing atmosphere of broad fellowship and friendly rivalry, impulse is given to every latent aptitude and special faculty. Meantime, enlarged humanity reflects itself in every participant, the best of each being given to all, and the best of all returns to each. So, the greatness as well as the power of a country broadens every life and blesses every home. Hence, it is that in questions of rank, of rights, of duties, country must stand supreme. The thought goes deeper. There is a mysterious law of our nature that, in this sense of membership and participation, the spirit rises to a magnitude commensurate with that of which it is part. The greatness of the whole passes into the consciousness of each. The power of the whole seems to become the power of each, and the character of the whole is impressed upon each. The inspiration of a noble cause involving human interests, wide and far, enables men to do things they did not dream themselves capable of before, and which they were not capable of alone. The consciousness of belonging vitally to something beyond individuality, of being part of a personality that reaches we know not where, in space and in time, greatens the heart to the limits of the soul's ideals and builds out the supreme of character. It was something like this, I think, which marked our motive, which made us strong to fight the bitter fight to the victorious end, and made us unrevengeful and magnanimous in that victory. We rose in soul above the things which even the Declaration of Independence pronounces the inalienable rights of human nature, for the securing of which governments are instituted among men. Happiness, liberty, life, we laid on the altar of offering, or committed to the furies of destruction, while our minds were lifted up to a great thought and our hearts swelled to its measure. We were beckoned on by the vision of destiny. We saw a country moving forward, charged with the sacred trusts of man. We believed in its glorious career, the power of high aims and of strong purpose, the continuity of great endeavor, the onward, upward path of history to God. Every man felt that he gave himself to and belonged to something beyond time and above place, something which could not die. These are the reasons, not fixed in the form of things, but formative of things, reasons of the soul, why we fought for the Union. And this is the spirit in which, having overcome the dark powers of denial and disintegration, having restored the people of the South to their place and privilege in the Union, and set on high the old flag telling of one life and one body, one freedom and one law over all the people and all the land between the four great waters, we now come, as it were, home. We look into each other's eyes. We speak in softer tones. We gather under the atmosphere of these sacred thoughts and memories, like the high, pure air that shines down upon us today, flooding these fields where cloud and flash and thunder roll of battle enshrouded us and them in that great 3 days burial. To celebrate this resurrection, to rear on these faraway fields memorials of familiar names, and to honor the state whose honor it was to rear such manhood and keep such faith that she might have part in faraway things. But there are other reasons, more determinate and tangible, reasons embodied in positive forms, which are matters of knowledge and understanding. I have said that the issue brought upon us was a question of politics. Everyone knows that I do not mean that this was a party question as to what particular set of persons or policies should have control of the government. And when I say that it was a political question, this is not saying that it was not also a moral question. For I do not think that politics and morals are so utterly alien and exclusive one from the other as some find it necessary to maintain. It is true that on one side, politics is concerned with forms, methods, measures, and herein acts chiefly upon economic and tactical considerations. Still, all these must be conformable, or at least not alien, to the great constructive principle which holds to the motive and to the final cause of action. Politics, I believe, is the organization of the human elements and powers for the promotion of right living and to secure the noblest ends of living attainable in human character. It is then a domain which, on its higher side, takes cognizance not alone of rights, but of rightness and of human worth and of a nobleness which has a moral and divine ideal. The sphere of politics, therefore, is the highest range of thought and action and the widest field of practical ethics set before the mind of the man for its earthly career. The issue before us, while having its ultimate ground in reason and great ethics and the perfectibility of man, was practically one of positive public law. It was an issue, as we believed, to enforce the performance of constitutional obligations undertaken deliberately and freely and under solemn pledges as the expression of the deepest convictions of the mind and consciousness of the people. If we were right, then there was such a being in power on this earth as the people of the United States of America. If we were wrong, then there was no such people, but a chaos and jarring elements and antagonizing interests. The forces arranged themselves across this line. It became the test of what we call loyalty. This was a positive, practical question. The test was sharp. The answer must be final. That question has been answered. At the cost of toil and treasure, of blood and tears, the people have made themselves the expounders of their Constitution. The decision has been accepted by clear, constitutional, and legal enactment, confirmed by the supreme judicial tribunals of the land, and we fervently trust, sealed by the benediction of the Most High. We are one people, and the law of its spirit is supreme over the law of its members. But grave responsibilities come with great victory. The danger is not so much, I think, from renewed attacks of those who lost, as from the tendency of power on the part of those who won. It should be distinctly borne in mind that we were not antagonizing the principle, of local self-government. Our triumph was for all the people, and in full recognition of the value in our political system of recognizing local centers of influence and of government. The lost cause is not lost liberty and right of self-government. What is lost is slavery of men and supremacy of states. It was necessary for us to save the Union. In the stress and sharpness of the conflict, we were forced to strain to the utmost all the central powers of the government and leave it to the after wisdom of the people to restore the equilibrium of powers, to see to it that the abnormal necessities of war should not be made precedents for the law of life and growth. Necessity is a dangerous plea for the privilege of power, especially when the sole judge of it is the power pretending it. In times of peace, when the free faculties of the people are proceeding by natural and spiritual laws of growth, the powers of government should be jealously guarded and its agents held close to the thought and purpose of the people. The national authority we have vindicated by the war means in the last analysis that Congress is the sole judge of its own powers and the sole executor of its own will. This is a tremendous trust. God grant that it be over-exercised, not in willfulness of power, nor by force of chance majorities, nor to favor particular or partisan interests, but with the large and long look and with the deep sense of constitutional obligation and of supreme trusts for the common well-being. To this end, the place of the state in our political system is one of vital importance. The interaction of local and national capacities is a peculiarity in our system, without parallel and but little understood in other lands, and liable to be too little regarded in our own. We make such account of checks and balances in the separation of the three departments of the government: legislative, executive, and judicial. A similar theory does not hold England from pressing steadily towards a concentration of power in the hands of our House of Commons, now practically absolute. We rely justly on the lines of division between state and national powers, a wisdom to which England has not yet attained, but of which the skillful recognition makes the strength of the German Empire of today, while the lack of it has held back the French Republic for 100 years. Local self-government alone could not have constructed this people, but without local self-government as an instrumentality in our representative system, neither government nor people could hold together. The generative and formative forces are in the local centers. These vortexes of living energy, touching and interfusing, are rounded into oneness and bound together by the deep central consciousness of mutual service and a common destiny. In the course of history, which we call the orderings of providence, local traditions, sentiments, needs, and aspirations have made up the strong composite character of this country. So long as the people of each decided local type and center feel that in the institutions, laws, and policies of the great people shaping the larger life, their own freedom is secured, their own thoughts and interests are represented, they will feel bound together by the central attraction of a vital force, and no lesser influence nor lower impulse can tempt away their loyalty, patriotism, and pride of partnership. But it is not enough that the state is supreme in its sphere and that departments of government shall not encroach upon each other. Our strongest safeguard is in personal participation in the direction and destiny of the nation. It is not the separation of spheres and offices in the administrative order, but the interpretation of state and national capacities in the organic order. The political unit of organization is neither the individual nor the state, but the people of each state, each man acting not in his personal capacity, but in his political capacity, exercising not his isolated natural rights in the commonly conceived, fictitious, impossible sense, but the powers and franchises recognized in him or conferred upon him in the constitution of his state, which is the appointed order of the common life. Our self-government is not the aggregate will of so many Ishmaelites, but the political people of the several states in their responsible character and mature convictions, regulating the civil order in their own state and reaching out to their larger interests, administering the great trusts of the nation. Just as the sphere and function of the states is the surest safeguard of liberty, as those who are to make and execute the laws which affect the daily life and dearest interests are chosen from among citizens whom the people know and can trust and can vouch for, so it is within the power of the same people, acting yet through their state organizations, to see to it that in the election of representatives, senators, and presidents, only such men are chosen as well understand the delicate articulations by which liberty is kept alive, who are brave and reverse the false maxim that the law cares not for the least, but only for the great, and who represents not only mere will of a momentary majority, but the heart and conscience of the manifold people which make their vote the voice of God. When the martyr president, standing on this hallowed ground at the consecration of the cemetery, uttered that noble climax of his immortal speech, we here highly resolve that the government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. He meant such a people as I have described. Surely he did not mean in this sublime utterance to justify the rule of mob majority, nor to furnish a watchword for revolutionists like those who a century ago in France knew not how to overthrow tyranny without overturning also the foundations of society, human and divine, nor a pretext for the anarchists and dynamiters of today who, in the name of the people, would let loose a riot of discordant and irresponsible individualism, a carnival of savage greed and frenzied passion. He, Lincoln, meant government. He meant a people holding its liberty under law, exercising its sovereignty by deliberation and delegation, respecting its minorities, checking its own caprice and facility of change, relegating great questions to its sober second thought, in consciousness alive in every part, but guided ever by great commanding convictions and pressing forward as one for the goal of the common good. Part and parcel of this political being of the people is this state of ours. As such, she stood on these hills and slopes a generation ago, of the foremost of the people's defenders, whether on the first, the second, or the third day's battle, whether on the right, caught and cut to pieces by the great shears blades of two suddenly enclosing hostile columns, on the left, rolled back by a cyclone of unappeasable assault, or on the center, dashed upon in an agony of desperation, terrible, sublime. Wherever there was a front, the guns of Maine thundered and her colors stood. And when the long, dense, surging fight was over, and the men who made and marked the line of honor were buried where they fell, the name of Maine ran along these crests and banks, from the cavalry fields, Wolf's Hill, Culp's Hill, and the Seminary Ridge, down through the cemetery, the peach orchard, the wheat field, to the Devil's Den, and to the Round Top Crags, a blazonry of ennobled blood. Now, you have gathered these bodies here. You mark their names with headstones and encompass them about with the cordon of the state's proud sorrow. You stationed them here on the ground they held. Here they will remain, not buried, but transfigured forms, part of the earth they glorified, part also of the glory that is to be. No chemistry of frost or rain, no overlaying mold of the seasons recurrent, life and death can ever separate from the soil of these consecrated fields the lifeblood so deeply commingled and incorporated here. Ever henceforth, under the rolling suns, when these hills are touched to splendor with the morning light, or smile of farewell to the lingering day, the flush, that broods upon them shall be rich, with a strange and crimson tone, not of the earth, not yet of the sky, but mediator and hostage between the two. But these monuments are not to commensurate the dead alone. Death was but the divine acceptance of life freely offered by everyone. Service was the central fact. That fact and that truth these monuments commemorate. They mark the centers around which stood the manhood of Maine, steadfast and noble service to the uttermost, to the uppermost. Those who fell here, those who have fallen before or since, those who linger yet a little longer, soon to follow, all are mustered in one great company on the shining heights of life, with that star of Maine's armorial ensign upon their foreheads forever, like the ranks of the galaxy. In great deeds, something abides. On great fields, something stays. Forms change and pass, bodies disappear, but spirits linger to consecrate ground for the vision place of souls, and reverent men and women from afar, and generations that know us not and that we know not of, heart drawn to see where and by whom great things were suffered and done for them, shall come to this deathless field to ponder and dream, and lo, the shadow of a mighty presence shall wrap them in its bosom, and the power of the vision pass into their souls. This is the great reward of service, to live far out and on in the life of others. This is the mystery of the Christ, to give life's best for such high stake that it shall be found again unto life eternal. So there you have the speech of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain at Gettysburg in October 1889, sharing his vision for what the Civil War was all about, how the differences between the people and the people all come into play, and of course, honoring those who fell, those who served, and those who survived the Battle of Gettysburg. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of A Life on the Civil War Research Trail.